On fire. Just kidding. I actually am going to be burning books. This is now a book burning stream. It was a pleasure to burn. Just kidding. Just kidding. Just kidding. I'm just joking. Just being a silly Billy. I'm actually not going to be burning books today. I'm actually going to be reading books. Well, actually, just one. The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Which, of course, is now it's finally, now that it's 2024, the world has finally come around to being able to read this book. It was banned up until this year in every single bookstore, every single country, every single school, for just being too gay. And now, I really should have waited until Pride Month to read this book, since it's so gay. That's what it was banned for. I think it says it. It says it somewhere in here. Whoa! Wilde began a lifelong friendship with Robbie Ross, who became his first homosexual lover. I don't know why I would respond to that with a whoa. I mean, it's 2024. Not 1864. Oof. Most serious literary journals treated The Picture of Dorian Gray as virtual pornography. Think of that as we read today. This is pornography. So when somebody says, I know it when I see it, about pornography, think about how that doesn't work. You think it works because when you see it, you think you know it too. But if you can't define it, it's going to keep shifting. I guess even if you do define something, it'll keep shifting. Rizzler. Well, anyway, we're going to read some Oscar Wilde, the ever quotable Oscar Wilde. Last time, Dorian Gray, the titular Dorian Gray, had fallen in love and proposed to marry the actress Sybil Vane. Sort of proposed. I don't think he got down on a knee and offered a ring or anything, but he there was talk. And well, that started to turn badly when Dorian brought his friends Basil Hallward the painter and Lord Henry the man in high position. I don't know what he does. He brought them to see one of Sybil's showings of Romeo and Juliet, where Sybil just played horribly. The audience laughed her off the stage, basically. She came up to Dorian afterwards and was so proud of how bad she was because it was proof that she had now understood love on a real level. Not all this faking she's been doing. Now she was really in love, so she can never fake it again. And Dorian admits that he really didn't love her, he just loved the idea of her as an artist. In a very rude way. He was very mean to her. A cruel, you would even say. And he stormed off and went home tortured and saw the painting, the actual titular picture of Dorian Gray, um, the titular picture of the titular Dorian Gray. He saw that his picture, painted by Basil Hallward, had been corrupted, had gained the cruelty in his smile that he felt when he was screaming at the poor Sybil Vane. Ah, hello to the person here. Uh, Poor Sybil Vane, unfortunately, uh, after this event, went up to her room and killed herself. Dorian hears about it the next morning after confirming that his portrait really has become corrupted and well, forgot my bar book, had to join the stream. Yeah, just listen to the stream at the bar. Put it on the TV. Ask the bartender, "Hey, can we put this on the TV?" Everybody should bring a book to the bar, man. It's actually pretty fun. Drinking with a buzz on, pretty good. Unless you're an alcoholic, then don't go to the bar. Um, anyway, Dorian Gray really didn't care that his almost fiancee has just committed suicide. Just commit the sin of suicide. Um, and just went to the opera with Lord Henry. Very rude. Very rude. He's given in to the corruption. He's decided to give in to his new hedonism and just allow himself to become corrupt. Well, with that, I suppose I'll read chapter 9 here. As he was sitting at breakfast next morning, Basil Hallward was shown into the room. I assume the he there means Dorian. "I am so glad I have found you, Dorian," he said gravely. "I called last night, and they told me you were at the opera. Of course, I knew that was impossible, but I wish you had left word where you had really gone to. I passed a dreadful evening, half afraid that one tragedy might be followed by another, and I think you might have telegraphed for me when you heard of it first. I read of it quite by chance in a late edition of the Globe that I picked up at the club. I came here at once, and was miserable at not finding you. I can't tell you how heartbroken I am about the whole thing. I know what you must suffer. But where were you? Did you go down and see the girl's mother? For a moment I thought of following you there. They gave the address in the paper. Somewhere in Euston Street, isn't it? But I was afraid of intruding upon a sorrow that I could not lighten. Oh, poor woman! What a state she must be in! And her only child, too! What did she say about it all?" That's another thing. It's not her only child. And her brother has sworn vengeance, sworn it on his life, that he would kill Dorian Gray if he did anything to hurt his sister. And then Dorian, I think literally the same day, killed his sister. Don't forget about that. "My dear Basil, how do I know?" murmured Dorian Gray, sipping some pale yellow wine from a delicate, gold-beaded bubble of Venetian glass, and looking dreadfully bored. "I was at the opera. You should have come on there. I met Lady Gwendolen, Harry's sister, for the first time. We were in her box. She is perfectly charming, and Patty sang divinely. Don't talk about horrid subjects. If one doesn't talk about the thing, it has never happened. It is simply expression, as Harry says, that gives reality to things. I may mention that she was not the woman's only child. There is a son, a charming fellow, I believe, but he is not on the stage. He is a sailor or something. And now tell me about yourself and what you are painting. You went to the opera? Said Hallward, speaking very slowly and with a strained touch of pain in his voice. You went to the opera while Sybil Vane was lying dead in some sordid lodging? You can talk to me of other women being charming and of Patty singing divinely before the girl you loved has even the quiet of a grave to sleep in? Why, man, there are horrors in store for that little white body of hers. Stop, Basil! I won't hear it, cried Dorian, leaping to his feet. You must not tell me about things. What is done is done. What is past is past. You call yesterday the past? What has the actual lapse of time got to do with it? It is only shallow people who require years to get rid of an emotion. A man who is master of himself can end a sorrow as easily as he can invent a pleasure. I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and to dominate them. Dorian, this is horrible. Something has changed you completely. You look exactly the same wonderful boy who, day after day, used to come down to my studio to sit for his picture. But you were simple, natural, and affectionate then. You were the most unspoiled creature in the whole world. Now I don't know what has come over you. You talk as if you had no heart, no pity in you. Is it all Harry's influence? Hmm. It is all Harry's influence. I see that. Slimy Ducks, what is that emoticon you just sent? That looks like a spleen or a stomach or something. What is that? That thing is beyond words. That's Lovecraftian. I can't even look at that thing. It's driving me mad. That's non-Euclidean emojiry. Well, it is all Harry's influence, I see that. The lad flushed up and, going to the window, looked out for a few moments on the green, flickering, sun-lashed garden. I owe a great deal to Harry, Basil, he said at last. More than I owe to you. You only taught me to be vain. Well, I am punished for that, Dorian, or shall be some day. I don't know what you mean, Basil, he exclaimed, turning round. I don't know what you want. What do you want? I want the Dorian Gray I used to paint. Basil, said the lad, going over to him and putting his hand on his shoulder, you have come too late. Can you hear that? Can you hear what he's doing right now? You've been rather loud recently, Kitty. He's been weird. He wants me to walk over and watch him eat food. Not gonna happen. Um, every once in a while, but I'm not at his beck and call. Basil, said the lad, going over to him and putting his hand on his shoulder, you have come too late. Yesterday, when I heard that Sybil Vane had killed herself, killed herself? Good heavens! Is there no doubt about that? Cried Hallward, looking up at him with an expression of horror. My dear Basil, surely you don't think it was a vulgar accident. Of course she killed herself. The elder man buried his face in his hands. How fearful! He muttered, and a shudder ran through him. No, said Dorian Gray, there is nothing fearful about it. It is one of the great romantic tragedies of the age. As a rule, people who act lead the most commonplace lives. They are good husbands, or faithful wives, or something tedious. You know what I mean? Middle class virtue and all that kind of thing. How different Sibyl was! She lived her finest tragedy. She was always a heroine. The last night she played, the night you saw her, she acted badly because she had known the reality of love. What she knew its When she knew its unreality, she died, as Juliet might have died. She passed again into the sphere of art. There is something of the martyr about her. Her death has all the pathetic uselessness of martyrdom, all its wasted beauty. But, as I was saying, you must not think I have not suffered. If you had come in yesterday at a particular moment, about 5:30, perhaps, or 5:45, you would have found me in tears. Even Harry, who was here, who brought me the news, in fact, had no idea what I was going through. I suffered immensely. Then it passed away. I cannot repeat an emotion. No one can, except sentimentalists. Uh, and you are awfully unjust, Basil. You come down here to console me. That is charming of you. You find me consoled, and you are furious. How like a sympathetic person. You remind me of a story Harry told me of a certain philanthropist who spent 20 years of his life in trying to get some grievance redressed or some unjust law altered. I forget exactly what it was. Finally, he succeeded, and nothing could exceed his disappointment. He had absolutely nothing to do, almost died of ennui, and became a confirmed misanthrope. And besides, my dear old Basil, if you really want to console me, teach me rather to forget what has happened, or to see it from a proper artistic point of view. Was it not Gautier who used to write about La Consolation des Arts? I remember picking up a little vellum covered book in your studio one day and chancing on that delightful phrase. Well, I am not like that young man you told me of when we were down at Marlow together, the young man who used to say that yellow satin could console one for all the miseries of life. I love beautiful things that one can touch and handle, old brocades, green bronzes, lacquer work, carved ivories, exquisite surroundings, luxury, pomp. There is much to be got of all these things, but the artistic temperament that they create, or at any rate reveal, is still more to me. To become the spectator of one's own life, as Harry says, is to escape the suffering of life. I know you are surprised at my talking to you like this. You have not realized how I have developed. I was a schoolboy when you knew me. I am a man now. I have new passions, new thoughts, new ideas. I am different, but you must not like me less. I am changed, but you must always be my friend. Of course, I am very fond of Harry, but I know that you are better than he is. You are not stronger. You are too much afraid of life. But you are better. And how happy we used to be together. Don't leave me, Basil, and don't quarrel with me. I am what I am. There is nothing more to be said. Did he just call himself God? I gotta blow my nose. I feel you, Joanna. The painter felt strangely moved. The lad was infinitely dear to him, and his personality had been the great turning point in his art. He could not bear the idea of reproaching him any more. After all, his indifference was probably merely a mood that would pass away. There was so much in him that was good, so much in him that was noble. "Well, Dorian," he said at length with a sad smile, "I won't speak to you again about this horrible thing, after today. I only trust your name won't be mentioned in connection with it. The inquest is to take place this afternoon. Have they summoned you?" Dorian shook his head, and a look of annoyance passed over his face at the mention of the word inquest. There was something so crude and vulgar about everything of the kind. "They don't know my name," he answered. "But surely she did." "Only my Christian name, and that I am quite sure she never mentioned to anyone. She told me once that they were all rather curious to learn who I was, and that she invariably told them my name was Prince Charming. It was pretty of her. You must do me a drawing of Sybil, Basil. I should like to have something more of her than the memory of a few kisses and some broken, pathetic words." "I will try and do something, Dorian, if it would please you. But you must come and sit to me yourself again. I can't get on without you." "I can never sit to you again, Basil. It is impossible," he exclaimed, starting back. The painter stared at him. "My dear boy, what nonsense!" he cried. "Do you mean to say you don't like what I did of you? Where is it? Why have you pulled the screen in front of it? Let me look at it. It is simply the best thing I have ever done." "Do take the screen away, Dorian. It is simply disgraceful of your servant hiding my work like that. I felt the room looked different as I came in." "My servant has nothing to do with it, Basil. You don't imagine I let him arrange my room for me. He settles my flowers for me sometimes, that is all. No, I did it myself. The light was too strong on the portrait." "Too strong? Surely not, my dear fellow." Kitty, he's going crazy. "Too strong? Surely not, my dear fellow. It is an admirable place for it. Let me see it." And Hallward walked towards the corner of the room. A cry of terror broke from Dorian Gray's lips, and he rushed between the painter and the screen. "Basil," he said, looking very pale, "you must not look at it. I don't wish you to." "Not look at my own work? You are not serious." "Why shouldn't I look at it?" exclaimed Hallward, laughing. "If you try to look at it, Basil, on my word of honor, I will never speak to you again as long as I live. I am quite serious. I don't offer any explanation, and you are not to ask for any. But remember, if you touch this screen, everything is over between us." Hallward was thunderstruck. He looked at Dorian Gray in absolute amazement. He had never seen him like this before. The lad was actually pallid with rage. His hands were clenched, and the pupils of his eyes were like disks of blue fire. He was trembling all over. "Dorian, don't speak." "But what is the matter?" "Of course I won't look at it if you don't want me to," he said, rather coldly, turning on his heel and going over towards the window. "But really it seems rather absurd that I shouldn't see my own work, especially as I am going to exhibit it in Paris in the autumn. I shall probably have to give it another coat of varnish before that, so I must see it some day. And why not today?" "To exhibit it? You want to exhibit it?" exclaimed Dorian Gray, a strange sense of terror creeping over him. Was the world going to be shown his secret? Were people to gape at the mystery of his life? That was impossible. Something, he did not know what, had to be done at once. Yes, I don't suppose you will object to that. Georges Petit is going to collect all my best pictures for a special exhibit in the Rue de Sèze, which will open the first week in October. The portrait will only be away a few months. I should think you could easily spare it for that time. In fact, you are sure to be out of town, and if you keep it always behind a screen, you can't care much about it. Dorian Gray passed his hand over his forehead. There were beads of perspiration there. He felt that he was on the brink of a horrible danger. "You told me a month ago that you would never exhibit it," he cried. "Why have you changed your mind? You people who go in for being consistent have just as many moods as others have. The only difference is that your moods are rather meaningless. You can't have forgotten that you assured me most solemnly that nothing in the world would induce you to send it to any exhibition. You told Harry exactly the same thing." He stopped suddenly, and a gleam of light came into his eyes. He remembered that Lord Henry had said to him once, half seriously and half in jest, "If you want to have a strange quarter of an hour, get Basil to tell you why he won't exhibit your picture." He told me why he wouldn't, and it was a revelation to me. Yes, perhaps Basil too has his secret. He would ask him and try. "Basil," he said, coming over quite close and looking him straight in the face, "we have each of us a secret. Let me know yours, and I shall tell you mine. What was your reason for refusing to exhibit my picture?" The painter, in spite of himself, the painter shuddered in spite of himself. "Dorian, if I told you, you might like me less than you do, and you would certainly laugh at me. I could not bear your doing either of those two things. If you wish me never to look at your picture again, I am content. I have always you to look at. If you wish the best work I have ever done to be hidden from the world, I am satisfied. Your friendship is dearer to me than any fame or reputation." "No, Basil, you must tell me," insisted Dorian Gray. "I think I have a right to know." His feelings of terror had passed away, and curiosity had taken its place. He was determined to find out Basil Hallward's mystery. "Let us sit down, Dorian," said the painter, looking troubled. "Let us sit down, and just answer me one question. Have you noticed in the picture something curious? Something that probably at first did not strike you, but that revealed itself to you suddenly?" "Basil!" cried the lad, clutching the arms of his chair with trembling hands and gazing at him with wild, startled eyes. "I see you did. Don't speak. If you don't know, they're not talking about the same thing. Dorian is seeing the picture change before his very eyes, like a spirit, like a horrible reflection of his soul. And Basil is just talking about how he put too much of himself in the portrait, which essentially means he has a crush on Dorian, I think. "I see you did. Don't speak. Don't speak," saying a misunderstanding happening and then somebody about to say something that would easily blow the misunderstanding, and then the person goes, "Shh, shh, 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 don't speak." It's always funny. "I see you did. Don't speak. Wait till you hear what I have to say, Dorian. Wait till you hear what I have to say. Dorian, from the moment I met you, your personality had the most extraordinary influence over me. I was dominated, soul, brain, and power, by you. You became to me the visible incarnation of that unseen ideal whose memory haunts us artists like an exquisite dream. I worshipped you. I grew jealous of everyone to whom you spoke. I wanted to have you all to myself. I was only happy when I was with you. When you were away from me, you were still present in my art. Of course, I never let you know anything about this. It would have been impossible. You would not have understood it. I hardly understood it myself. I only knew that I had seen perfection face to face, and that the world had become wonderful to my eyes, too wonderful perhaps, for in such mad worships there is peril, the peril of losing them, no less than the peril of keeping them. Weeks and weeks went on, and I grew more and more absorbed in you. Then came a new development. I had drawn you as Paris in dainty armor, and as Adonis with huntsman's cloak, polished boar spear, crowned with heavy lotus blossoms. You had sat at the prow of Adrian's barge, gazing across the green turbid Nile. You had leaned over the still pool of some Greek woodland, and seen in the water's silent silver the marvel of your own face. And it had all been what art should be, unconscious, ideal, and remote. One day, a fatal day, I sometimes think, I determined to paint a wonderful portrait of you as you actually are, not in the costume of dead ages, but in your own dress and in your own time. Whether it was the realism of the method or the mere wonder of your personality, thus directly presented to me without mist or veil, I cannot tell. But I know that as I worked at it, every flake and film of color seemed to reveal my secret. I grew afraid that others would know of my idolatry. I felt, Dorian, that I had told too much, that I had put too much of myself into it. Then it was that I resolved never to allow the picture to be exhibited. You were a little annoyed, but then you did not realize all that it meant to me. Harry, to whom I talked about it, laughed at me, but I did not mind that. When the picture was finished, and I sat alone with it, I felt that I was right. Well, after a few days, the thing left my studio, and as soon as I had got rid of the intolerable fascination of its presence, it seemed to me that I had been foolish in imagining that I had seen anything in it. More than that, you were extremely good looking, and that I could paint. Even now I cannot help feeling that it is a mistake to think that the passion one feels in creation is ever really shown in the work one creates. Art is always more abstract than we fancy. Form and color tell us of form and color. That is all. It often seems to me that art conceals the artist far more completely than it ever reveals him. And so, when I got this offer from Paris, I determined to make your portrait the principal thing in my exhibition. It never occurred to me that you would refuse. I see now that you were right. The picture cannot be shown. You must not be angry with me, Dorian, for what I have told you. As I said to Harry once, you are made to be worshipped. Uh, excuse you. Dorian Gray drew a long breath. The color came back to his cheeks, and a smile played about his lips. The peril was over. He was safe for the time. Yet he could not help feeling infinite pity for the painter who had just made this strange confession to him, and wondered if he himself would ever be so dominated by the personality of a friend. Lord Henry had the charm of being very dangerous, but that was all. He was too clever and too cynical to be really fond of. Would there ever be someone who would fill him with a strange idolatry? Was that one of the things that life had in store? "It is extraordinary to me, Dorian," said Hallward, "that you should have seen this in the portrait. Did you really see it?" "I saw something in it," he answered. "Something that seemed to me very curious." "Well, you don't mind my looking at the thing now?" Dorian shook his head. "You must not ask me that, Basil. I could not possibly let you stand in front of that picture." "You will some day, surely." "Never." "Well, perhaps you are right. And now good-bye, Dorian. You have been the one person in my life who has really influenced my art. Whatever I have done that is good I owe to you. Ah, you don't know what it cost me to tell you all that I have told you." "My dear Basil," said Dorian, "what have you told me? Simply that you felt that you admired me too much? That is not even a compliment." "It was not intended as a compliment. It was a confession. Now that I have made it, something seems to have gone out of me. Perhaps one should never put one's worship into words." "It was a very disappointing confession." "Why, what did you expect, Dorian? You didn't see anything else in the picture, did you? There was nothing else to see." "No, there was nothing else to see. Why do you ask? But you mustn't talk about worship. It is foolish. You and I are friends, Basil, and we must always remain so." "You have got Harry," said the painter sadly. "Oh, Harry!" cried the lad with a ripple of laughter. "Harry spends his days in saying what is incredible and his evenings in doing what is improbable. Just the sort of life I would like to lead. But still, I don't think I would go to Harry if I were in trouble. I would sooner go to you, Basil." "You will sit to me again?" "Impossible! You spoil my life as an artist by refusing, Dorian. No man comes across two ideal things. Few come across one." "I can't explain it to you, Basil, but I must never sit to you again. There is something fatal about a portrait. It has a life of its own. I will come and have tea with you. That'll be just as pleasant." "Pleasanter for you, I am afraid," murmured Hallward regretfully. "And now good-bye. I am sorry you won't let me look at the picture once again, but that can't be helped. I quite understand what you feel about it." As he left the room, Dorian Gray smiled to himself. Poor Basil! How little he knew of the true reason! And how strange it was that, instead of having been forced to reveal his own secret, he had succeeded, almost by chance, in wresting a secret from his friend. How much that strange confession explained to him. The painter's absurd fits of jealousy, his wild devotion, his extravagant pancreas, pancreas, pangrynics, his curious reticences. My goodness. He understood them all now and felt sorry. Okay. He may understand them, but I don't. What does this mean? Pan Panegyrix, Panegyrix, Panegyrix,
Panegyric.
Panegyrix. A public speech or published text in praise of someone. More Panegyrics. Not a lot of people saying panegyrics nowadays. Eulogy, tributes. So his extravagant panegyrics. So paying extreme tribute to Dorian Gray here. Mr. Beast. Hello, Mr. Beast. Welcome. Dorian Gray. More like Dorian Gay, because we just had a very gay confession here. So panegyrics. The painter's absurd fits of jealousy, his wild devotion, his extravagant panegyrics, his curious reticences. Reticence?
Reticence.
Reticence. I know that word. I've just never seen it spelled, I guess.
Reticence.
His extravagant. No. His curious reticence. If anybody ever doesn't understand a word that's said during the streams, or doesn't understand what's going on, we can stop and we can talk about it. It's not an audiobook, it's a reading and discussion. I love to discuss the books that I'm reading. So he's giving extravagant panegyrics.
Panegyric.
And has curious reticence.
Reticence.
Which reticence is being reserved. It's not wanting. If you have reticence to, I don't know, compliment a pretty girl, then you won't compliment her. You have reticence to show too much feeling, so you refuse to compliment the pretty girl, that kind of thing. The painter's absurd fits of jealousy, his wild devotion, his extravagant panegyrics, his curious reticences. No, reticence, just reticence. He understood them all now, and he felt sorry. There seemed to him to be something tragic in a friendship so colored by romance. Gay! They did it! They said... He sighed and touched the bell. The portrait must be hidden away at all costs. He could not run such a risk of discovery again. It had been mad of him to have allowed the thing to remain, even for an hour, in a room to which any of his friends had access. End of chapter 9. Yeah, you gotta hide away that portrait that reveals all of your sins, especially since you're gonna keep sinning. Panegyrics. Soliloquies of praise, pronouncements. Accolades, tributes, testimonials, eulogies. Reticence, resistance, restraint, inhibition. Reticence, panegyrics. Chapter 10. When his servant entered, he looked at him steadfastly and wondered if he had thought of peering behind the screen. The man was quite impassive and waited for his orders. Dorian lit a cigarette and walked over to the glass and glanced into it. He could see the reflection of Victor's face perfectly. It was like a placid mask of servility. There was nothing to be afraid of there. Yet he thought it best to be on his guard. Speaking very slowly, he told him to tell the housekeeper that he wanted to see her, and then to go to the frame maker and ask him to send two of his men round at once. It seemed to him that as the man left the room, his eyes wandered in the direction of the screen. Was it oh, Kitty. Or was it that merely his own or was that merely his own fancy? After a few moments in her black silk dress, with old-fashioned thread mittens on her wrinkled hands, Miss Mrs. Leaf bustled into the library. He asked her for the key of the schoolroom. "The old schoolroom, Mr. Dorian!" she exclaimed. "Why, it is full of dust. I must get arranged and put straight before you go into it. It is not fit for you to see, sir. It is not indeed." "I don't want it put straight, Leaf. I only want the key." "Well, sir, you'll be covered with cobwebs if you go into that. Why, it hasn't been opened for nearly 5 years, not since his lordship died." He winced at the mention of his grandfather. He had hateful memories of him. "That does not matter," he answered. "I simply want to see the place. That is all. Give me the key." Uh, and here's the key, sir," said the old lady, going over the contents of her bunch with tremulously uncertain hands. Uh, "Here is the key. I'll have it off the bunch in a moment. But you don't think of living up there, sir? You so comfortable here." I like them calling a key of rings a bunch. I'm gonna start calling my keys my bunch of keys. "No, no," he cried petulantly. "Thank you, Leaf, that will do." She lingered for a few moments, and was garrulous over some detail of the household. Garrulous. Garrulous? Garrulous? Garrulous?
Garrulous.
Okay. Gare. Gare? Garrulous? Garrulous. Well, apparently garrulous. People are who's saying garrulous in 2019? How are more people saying garrulous in 2019 than they were in 1980? Um, Garrulous. So excessively talkative, especially on trivial matters. So she goes over to some trivial little part of the house and starts rambling on uselessly over it. She lingered for a few moments and was garrulous over some detail of the household. He sighed and told her to manage things as she thought best. She left the room, wreathed in smiles. As the door closed, Dorian put the key in his pocket and looked round the room. His eye fell on a large purple satin coverlet heavily embroidered with gold, a splendid piece of late 17th century Venetian work his grandfather had found in a convent near Bologna. And I never knew how to say this. I know that this is a town in France, I think, but Italy. It's in Italy. But it's not just straight up pronounced Bologna, is it? I never knew how to pronounce it. Let's figure it out. Only 11 hours from here. Hell. These pronunciation videos are always a chance you're just going to run into something that's a complete lie, by the way. You can't just outright trust these things. How do you say it?
Buongiorno. We are looking at how to pronounce the name of the city in Italy. This is the historic capital of the Emilia-Romagna region in northern Italy.
Just say
How
it.
do you go about pronouncing it? In Italy, in Italian, the name of this city is normally said as Bologna. You do want to stress on the middle syllable, on the
Bologna.
low syllable. Bologna. Very straightforward. Once you know,
Bologna.
Bologna. And now you know.
Bologna.
Was this helpful? Did you get it? Let me know in the comments. Here are more videos on how to pronounce more Italian words, names of cities, and much more whose pronunciations aren't exactly always obvious.
Bologna.
I see the family right, but nobody else.
This was the moment of the angry young men, kitchen sink drama, the beginning of the end for received pronunciation.
What are you talking about?
As I showed in my last video, the most established symbols for standard British vowels were carefully chosen to represent an accent that today is so comically posh and old-fashioned that it couldn't be used by a BBC newsreader. This is not typical. Language and speech are always changing.
Alright, I was getting too interested. I'll watch that later. That his grandfather found in a convent near Bologna. Yes, that would serve to wrap the dreadful thing in. It had perhaps served often as a pall for the dead. Pall. Paul.
Paul.
Covering. A covering, a cloth spread over a coffin, hearse, or tomb. So, pall is the velvet cloth they put over your coffin. It's the exact opposite of the little baby blue blanket your mother gave you, swaddled you in. Now it was to hide something that had a corruption of its own, worse than the corruption of death itself. Something that would breed horrors and yet would never die. What the worm was to the corpse, his sins would be to the painted image on the canvas. They would mar its beauty and eat away its grace. They would defile it and make it shameful, and yet the thing would still live on. It would be always alive. He never sleeps. He says he'll never die. He shuddered, and for a moment he regretted that he had not told Basil the true reason why he had wished to hide the picture away. Basil would have helped him to resist Lord Henry's influence, and the still more poisonous influences that came from his own temperament. The love that he bore him, for it was really love, had nothing in it that was not noble and intellectual. It was not that mere physical admiration of beauty that is born of the senses and that dies when the senses tire. It was such love as Michelangelo had known, as Montaigne, as Winckelmann, as Shakespeare himself. Yes, Basil could have saved him, but it was too late now. The past could always be annihilated. Regret, denial, or forgetfulness could do that. But the future was inevitable. There were passions in him that would find their terrible outlet, dreams that would make the shadow of their evil real. He took up from the couch the great purple and gold texture that covered it, and, holding it in his hands, passed behind the screen. Was the face on the canvas viler than before? It seemed to him that it was unchanged, and yet his loathing of it was intensified. Gold hair, blue eyes, and rose-red lips, they all were there. It was simply the expression that had altered. It was horrible in its cruelty, compared to what he saw in it of censure or rebuke. How shallow Basil's reproach about Sybil Vane had been, how shallow, and of what little account. His own soul was looking out at him from the canvas and calling him to judgment. A look of pain came across him, and he flung the rich pall over the canvas. As he did so, a knock came to the door. He passed out as his servant entered. The persons are here, monsieur. Les personnes are here, monsieur. He felt that the man must be got rid of at once. He must not be allowed to know where the picture was being taken to. There was something sly about him. He had thoughtful, treacherous eyes. Sitting down at the writing table, he scribbled a note to Lord Henry, asking him to send him round something to read, and reminding him that they were to meet at 8:15 that evening. "Wait for an answer," he said, handing it to him, "and show the men in here." In 2 or 3 minutes there was another knock, and Mr. Hubbard himself, the celebrated frame-maker of South Audley Street, came in with a somewhat rough-looking young assistant. Mr. Hubbard was a florid, red-whiskered little man, whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate impetuous. Wow, that's a 1-2 punch of me not knowing what these words mean. Inveterate, impetuant, impetuosity. Impetuosity. I'm more curious about what that means. Impetuosity. Let's see. Impetuosity. As in poverty, the state of lacking sufficient money. Oh my. Can you see my impetuosity? Let's see. Donate to my Patreon. Just to delete my impetuosity. Let's see. Please. Please load faster.
Impecuniosity.
Oh my goodness. Impecuniosity.
Impecuniosity.
Impecuniosity. Impecuniosity, huh? Impecuniosity is to be poor. The level of my impecuniosity was such that I could not afford to eat at the cheapest greasy spoon. Impecuniosity. Impecuniosity. Donate to my Patreon, or else I'll be forced to fall into impecuniosity. What was the other word there? Inveterate? This one sounds more familiar. Impecuniosity. Impecuniosity.
Inveterate.
Having a particular habit, activity, or interest. So a long-established habit. Inveterate. Almost like it's in your invertebrate. Deep set, deep rooted, deep seated. Chronic. Inveterate impecuniosity. Mr. Hubbard was a florid, red-whiskered little man whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate impecuniosity of most of the artists who dealt with him. I lost it. Okay. Sorry, I accidentally just skipped around. Mr. Hubbard was a florid. Florid. It just occurs to me I don't really know what that word is either. Excessively showy, huh? So a gaudy man. Flamboyant and gaudy. That's not how I was imagining him, so I'm glad I looked that up. Flowery, florid, makes sense. So, Mr. Hubbard was a florid, meaning a flashy or gaudy, pompous, red-whiskered little man whose admiration for art was considerably tempered by the inveterate impecunicity of most of the artists who dealt with him. As a rule, he never left his shop. He waited for people to come to him. But he always made an exception in favor of Dorian Gray. There was something about Dorian that charmed everybody. It was a pleasure even to see him. "What can I do for you, Mr. Gray?" he said, rubbing his fat, freckled hands. "I thought I would do myself the honor of coming round in person. I have just got a beauty of a frame, sir. Picked it up at a sale. Old Florentine. Came from Fonthill, I believe. Admirably suited for a religious subject, Mr. Gray." "I am so sorry you have given yourself the trouble of coming round, Mr. Hubbard. I shall certainly drop in and look at the frame, though I don't go in much at present for religious art. But today I only want a picture carried to the top of the house for me. It is rather heavy, so I thought I would ask you to lend me a couple of your men." "No trouble at all, Mr. Gray. I am delighted to be of any service to you. Which is the work of art, sir?" "This," replied Dorian, moving the screen back. "Can you move it, covering it all just as it is? I don't want it to get scratched going upstairs." "There will be no difficulty, sir," said the genial frame-maker, beginning, with the aid of his assistant, to unhook the picture from the long brass chain by which it was suspended. "And now, where shall we carry it to, Mr. Gray?" "I will show you the way, Mr. Hubbard, if you will kindly follow me. Or perhaps you had better go in front. I am afraid it is right at the top of the house. We will go up by the front staircase, as it is wider." He held the door open for them, and they passed out into the hall and began the ascent. The elaborate character of the frame had made the picture extremely bulky, and now and then, in spite of the obsequious protests of Mr. Hubbard, who had the true tradesman's spirited dislike of seeing a gentleman doing anything useful. Dorian put his hand to it so as to help them. Obsequious. Now, I think obsequious is like excessive. Obsequious. Obedient or attentive. That was in here. We looked this one up recently. That was in something else. Obsequious.
Obsequious.
Servile. So an excessively servile person is obsequious. And in spite of the obsequious protests of Mr. Hubbard, who had the true tradesman's spirited dislike of seeing a gentleman doing anything useful, Dorian put his hand to it so as to help them. "Something of a load to carry, sir," gasped the little man when they reached the top landing. He wiped his shiny forehead. "I'm afraid it is rather heavy," murmured Dorian as he unlocked the door that opened into the room that was to keep for him the curious secret of his life and hide his soul from the eyes of men. He had not entered the place for more than 4 years, not, indeed, since he had used it first as a playroom when he was a child, and then as a study when he grew somewhat older. It was a large, well-proportioned room, which had been specially built by the last Lord Kelso for the use of the little grandson whom, for his strange likeness to his mother, and also for other reasons, he had always hated and desired to keep at a distance. It appeared to Dorian to have but little changed. There was the huge Italian cassone, with its fantastically painted panels and its tarnished gilt mouldings in which he had so often hidden himself as a boy. There the satin-work bookcase filled with his dog-eared school-books. On the wall behind it was hanging the same ragged Flemish tapestry where a faded king and queen were playing chess in a garden, while a company of hawkers rode by, carrying hooded birds on their gauntleted wrists. How well he remembered it all! Every moment of his lonely childhood came back to him as he looked round. He recalled the stainless purity of his boyish life, and it seemed horrible to him that it was here the fatal portrait was to be hidden away. How little he had thought, in those dead days, of all that was in store for him. I was just thinking about that too. The child version of yourself. Cassione. Cassone. Marriage chest. What's it? It's a chest. Okay. I feel you, Johanna. Little bit of a insight into Dorian's childhood. He was very neglected and by his grandfather, who, if you remember, was, I think, all that he had. I think his father was a scoundrel of some sort, or maybe a poor soldier. He was a poor man. And the mother ran away with this poor man. And I believe it ended with the mother dead. So Dorian only had this grandfather to raise him, who just stuck him in a house. Perhaps that can give you some insight into his character, if you choose to look into that. But there was no other place in the house so secure from prying eyes as this. He had the key, and no one else could enter it. Beneath its purple pall, the face painted on the canvas could grow bestial, sodden, and unclean. What did it matter? No one could see it. He himself would not see it. Why should he watch the hideous corruption of his soul? He kept his youth. That was enough. And besides, might not his nature grow finer after all? There was no reason that the future should be so full of shame. Some love might come across his life and purify him and shield him from those sins that seemed to be already stirring in spirit and in flesh. Those curious, unpictured sins whose very mystery lent them their subtlety and their charm. Perhaps some day the cruel look would have passed away from the scarlet, sensitive mouth, and he might show to the world Basil Hallward's masterpiece. No, that was impossible. Hour by hour and week by week, the thing upon the canvas was growing old. It might escape the hideousness of sin, but the hideousness of age was in store for it. The cheeks would become hollow or flaccid. Yellow crow's feet would creep round the fading eyes and make them horrible. The hair would lose its brightness. The mouth would gape or droop, would be foolish or gross, and as the months as the mouths of old men are. There would be the wrinkled throat, the cold blue veined hands, the twisted body that he remembered in the grandfather who had been so stern to him in his boyhood. The picture had to be concealed. There was no help for it. "Bring it in, Mr. Hubbard, please," he said wearily, turning round. "I'm sorry I kept you so long. I was thinking of something else." "Always glad to have a rest, Mr. Gray," answered the frame maker, who was still gasping for breath. "Where shall we put it, sir?" "Oh, anywhere. Here, this will do. I don't want to have it hung up. Just lean it against the wall, thanks." "Might one look at the work of art, sir?" Dorian startled. "It would not interest you, Mr. Hubbard," he said, keeping his eye on the man. He felt ready to leap upon him and fling him to the ground if he dared to lift the gorgeous hanging that concealed the secret of his life. "I shan't trouble you any more. I am much obliged for your kindness in coming round." "Not at all, not at all, Mr. Gray. Ever ready to do anything for you, sir." And Mr. Hubbard tramped downstairs, followed by the assistant, who glanced back at Dorian with a look of shy wonder in his rough, uncomely face. He had never seen anyone so marvelous. When the sound of their footsteps had died away, Dorian locked the door and put the key in his pocket. He felt safe now. No one would ever look upon the horrible thing. No eye but his would ever see his shame. On reaching the library, he found that it was just after 5 o'clock, and that the tea had been already brought up. On a little table of dark perfumed wood, thickly encrusted with nacre, a present from Lady Radley, his guardian's wife, pretty professional invalid who had spent the preceding winter in Cairo, was lying a note from Lord Henry, and beside it was a book bound in yellow paper, the cover slightly torn and the edges soiled. A copy of the third edition of the St. James's Gazette had been placed on the tea tray. It was evident that Victor had returned. He wondered if he had met the men in the hall as they were leaving the house and wormed out of them what they had been doing. He would be sure to miss the picture, had no doubt missed it already, while he had been laying the tea things. The screen had not been set back, and a blank space was visible on the wall. Perhaps some night he might find him creeping upstairs, trying to force the door of the room. It was a horrible thing to have a spy in one's house. He had heard of rich men who had been blackmailed all their lives by some servant who had read a letter, or overheard a conversation, or picked up a card with an address, or found beneath a pillow a withered flower or a shred of crumpled lace. He sighed, and having poured himself out some tea, opened Lord Henry's note. It was simply to say that he had sent him round the evening paper and a book that might interest him, and that he would be at the club at 8:15. He opened the St. James's languidly and looked through it. A red pencil mark on the 5th page caught his eye. It drew attention to the following paragraph. Inquest on an actress. An inquest was held this morning at the Bell Tavern, Hoxton Road, by Mr. Danby, the district courier, on the body of Sybil Vane, a young actress recently engaged at the Royal Theatre, Holborn. A verdict of death by misadventure was returned. Considerable sympathy was expressed for the mother of the deceased, who was greatly affected during the giving of her own evidence, and that of Dr. Birrell, who had made the post-mortem examination of the deceased. Rest in peace, Sybil Vane. He frowned, and tearing the paper in two, went across the room and flung the pieces away. How ugly it all was, and how horribly real ugliness made things. He felt a little annoyed with Lord Henry for having sent him the report. It was certainly stupid of him to have marked it with red pencil. Victor might have read it. The man knew more than enough English for that. He's getting very paranoid. People he had read it. Perhaps he had read it, and had begun to suspect something. And yet what did it matter? What had Dorian Gray to do with Sybil Vane's death? There was nothing to fear. Dorian Gray had not killed her. His eyes fell on the yellow book that Lord Henry had sent him. What was it, he wondered? He went towards the little pearl-colored octagonal stand that had always looked to him like the work of some strange Egyptian bees that wrought in silver, and taking up the volume, flung himself into an armchair and began to turn over the leaves. After a few minutes he became absorbed. It was the strangest book that he had ever read. It seemed to him uh-oh. It seemed to him that in exquisite Raymond and to the delicate sound of flutes, the sins of the world were passing in dumb show before him. Things that he had dimly dreamed of were suddenly made real to him. Things of which he had never dreamed were gradually revealed. Raymond. He's reading The King in Yellow. Clothing. Particularly fancy clothing.
Raiment. Raiment.
Raiment. It seemed to him that in exquisite raiment, and to the delicate sound of flutes, the sins of the world were passing in dumb show before him. Dumb meaning silent, of course. Things that he had dimly dreamed of were suddenly made real to him. Things of which he had never dreamed were gradually revealed. It was a novel without a plot, and with only one character, being indeed simply a psychological study of a certain young Parisian who spent his life trying to realize in the 19th century all the passions and modes of thought that belonged to every century except his own, and to sum up, as it were, in himself the various moods through which the world's spirit had ever passed, loving for their mere artificiality those renunciations that men have unwisely called virtue, as much as those natural rebellions that wise men still call sin. The style in which it was written was that curious jewelled style, vivid and obscure at once, full of argot and anarchisms, of technical expressions and of elaborate paraphrases, that characterizes the work of some of the finest artists of the French school, symbolists. There were in it metaphors as monstrous as orchids, and as subtle in color. The life of the senses was described in the terms of mystical philosophy. One hardly knew at times whether one was reading the spiritual ecstasies of some medieval saint or the morbid confessions of a modern sinner. It was a poisonous book. The heavy odor of incense seemed to cling about its pages and to trouble the brain. The mere cadence of the sentences, the subtle monotony of their music, so full as it was of complex refrains and movements elaborately repeated, produced in the mind of the lad, as he passed from chapter to chapter, a form of reverie, a malady of dreaming, that made him unconscious of the falling day and creeping shadows. Cloudless and pierced by one solitary star, copper-green sky gleamed through the windows. He read on by its wan light till he could read no more. Then, after his valet had reminded him several times of the lateness of the hour, he got up, going into the next room, placed the book on the little Florentine table that always stood at his bedside, and began to dress for dinner. It was almost 9 o'clock before he reached the club, where he found Lord Henry sitting alone in the morning room, looking very much bored. "I am so sorry, Harry," he cried, "but it really is entirely your fault. That book you sent me so fascinated me that I forgot how the time was going." "Yes, I thought you would like it," replied the host, rising from his chair. "I didn't say I liked it, Harry. I said it fascinated me. There is a great difference." "Ah, you have discovered that," murmured Lord Henry, as they passed into the dining room. Almost 10 o'clock here, and this next chapter looks kind of long. I believe I'll leave it there, even though I've only been reading for about not even an hour and a half. It is almost 10 o'clock, and I been awake for what? 18 hours, not too bad. But either way, I grow tired. I grow weary. So, I'm going to try to get another stream in tomorrow. Get through more of Dorian Gray here. My God, Harry, what shall I do? As we're on chapter 11 next. No. Chapter 11. Here we are. Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast, why didn't you say anything that stream if you were there watching? You should be interacting with me so I have someone to talk to. Well, good night, Mr. Beast. And good night, one and all. Hope you have better dreams than Dorian Gray.